welcome to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm Gabriel Sanders, Public Programs Producer at the museum. This event is Running for Shelter with Suzette Sheft and Nechama Birnbaum. Today we hosted 32 events throughout the museum with 85 speakers and 72 author signings. There are 2 more events tonight, so if you're able to catch them, we have Joy Layden and Greg Bordowitz in conversation on the human-divine relationship. That'll be in the Keeping History Center. And Michael Twitty.
Where will it be? Can you say that? Where will it be?
That's going to be in the Keeping History Center. Joy Layden and Greg Bordowitz in conversation. That starts at 7:15. These are our final 2 events of the evening. The second one is Michael Twitty in conversation with James Ziegelman on his new book, Kosher Soul. That'll be on our Edmund J. Saffer Hall. Both at 7:15 to 8:15 with their assignments from 8:15 to 8:45. Now that the exhibitions are closed, we hope you will join us in the future to see the Holocaust What Hate Can Do and Survivors, Faces of Life After the Holocaust, photographs by Martin Scholler. Andy Goldsworthy's Garden of Stones is also worth a visit just outside our Cafe Locks. In the fall, we will be opening a children's and family exhibition on the Danish Rescue, and we hope you can join us in the fall for that. Books will be available, Suzette's book and other gifts in the Pickman Museum shop. This program is made possible in part by support from the Battery Park City Authority, and your donations also help us present these programs. Now I'm glad to introduce our speakers. Suzette Sheft is a 16-year-old student at the Horace Mann School in New York City. In her free time, she enjoys writing, reading, running, volunteering, and spending time with her family. She won a Scholastic Silver Key for an excerpt of Running for Shelter and her debut novel. The book is dedicated to her late father, who inspired her to write and share her family story. Nechama Birnbaum had known since she was a little girl that she would write her grandmother's story. Her friends' grandmas brought them presents, hers brought her stories. Lucky for her, stories were her favorite thing of all, especially the story of one stubborn redhead's determination to survive. Birnbaum is the author of The Redhead of Auschwitz, a true story. Running for Shelter is available in our shop, as I said. Suzette will sign copies after in the main lobby. And we're so happy to have you here. I'm also a person who cares deeply about family history and have been working on a project recording the stories of my grandparents. So I appreciate the work that you do, and we're honored to have you here. So I'll hand it off to both of you.
Thank you. Okay, hi. Okay, so I'm Suzette. I'm 16 and I live here in New York City. And I started writing my book, which is called Running for Shelter, when I was 13, so 3 years ago. And my book is about my grandmother, who was hidden during the Holocaust. And yeah, so it was just published in November, and I'm hoping to use it to help educate other teenagers about the Holocaust and the importance of Holocaust education.
So hi everyone, my name is Nechama Birnbaum. When I was 13, I was not writing a book, but everyone give it up for Suzette. I also wrote a book on my grandmother when I was out of high school. And it's about her story. It's called The Redhead of Auschwitz, and it's about her story in Auschwitz and in the ammunition factory and in the Death March, and her background, her childhood before the war, and how she survived. And one thing that we have in common is both of our grandparents were redheads. So that's just one thing, and we both also have the same publisher.
Amsterdam Publishers.
Yeah. So I'm going to be asking Suzette questions, and she's going to be she's going to be beautifully telling you about her book. So can you tell me what inspired you to write your book?
Yes. So I had always gone to Holocaust museums like this one for a lot of my early years, ever since I can remember. And I also used to only read exclusively books about the Holocaust. Now I've branched out a little bit, but it's still mostly about World War II and the Holocaust. And so this interest stemmed from my grandmother's stories probably as someone who was hidden during the Holocaust. And I then read this account that she had written about her journey and situation during the Holocaust. It was only around like 3 pages, and it had been written probably in the 90s, so a long time ago. And that really piqued my interest, and I was inspired after visiting many Holocaust museums and reading lots of books about World War II and the Holocaust.
I'm gonna interrupt you
Yes.
for another question. Have you known, like when you were young and going to Holocaust museums, did you feel drawn to it? Like, have you heard your grandmother's story, or only after you read that excerpt?
I had heard small snippets of my grandmother's story, but it had only been from my dad, not from my grandma, because she didn't like to talk about it that much. And so when I was able to read the excerpt from her perspective, I realized how much of like a deeper understanding that gave to me. And so I wanted to record her story. And then, so I started when I was 13, and then that same year, my dad passed away, and I found that I couldn't remember the stories that he used to tell me about his childhood. And so I didn't want the same thing to happen with my grandma, and so I set out to record her story so that it could be immortalized forever, especially because recent statistics have shown that people my age don't know as much about the Holocaust anymore.
So
And
that was like a driving
that was like a catalyst. Yeah.
to educate other people.
Yes, and to write my book. What was your
Right.
inspiration for your book?
I always loved my grandmother's story. She used to tell us all the time that when she was 18 years old and she was sent to Auschwitz, and all of her friends told her, "We're going to heaven from here," and they knew. They would look up at the smoke, and all the Nazis said, "This is the smoke of your parents. This is the remains of your parents and your grandparents and your sisters and brothers, and you're next." And so their friends said, "We're going to heaven from here," and she said, "You can go to heaven if you want. I'm going home from here. After that, we'll see where I go. I'm not sure, but I'm not going to heaven now." And they looked at her and they said, "You're delusional. Do you see where you are? You are not surviving this, and don't be crazy. Just accept your reality." And she fought with them. She said, "Don't tell me where I'm going. I'm going home from here." And then when I was 18 years old, I went to Auschwitz to visit with my family to see it, and I realized I'm standing there the same age that she stood there, and she went home and she had, my mom, who had me, and she did everything that was unrealistic and not in reality, but she was the only one of her friends that went home. So I wanted to write about that courage and that strength and that perseverance first. And she always wanted to write it for Suzette's reason about so many people don't know about the Holocaust, so many people don't know, we have to educate the world. And in my naivety, I said, of course everybody knows about the Holocaust because we grew up like it was like our bread and butter, like it was a regular everyday story. It was another story from the Holocaust. And then once I started writing, I was doing research, and it's like, what was the numbers? Do you remember? Like 60% of
yeah, around, I think it was a little bit higher.
Higher.
70% of Gen Z and millennials couldn't name like a single concentration camp.
Right, and they didn't know how many people. They said like, oh yeah, like 100,000 Jews were killed, or things like that. Right? You've seen that study? Like it's horrifying. So many people didn't know. And denying, right? So that sort of was our inspiration. Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about your writing process and how you got to writing it? I mean, it boggles my mind that you could have done this. It's such a beautiful book at such a young age, and I would love to hear about your process and tell everyone.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I started writing the book, as I said, when I was 13, and I started off this process over summer break, and so I went to my grandma's house in Florida, and I sat down with her and I interviewed her for a week straight. I lived at her apartment with her, and every day we would start at around 7 a.m. I would recap what we talked about the day before, and then we would keep going until it was dark out or until it was dinner time. And then when I got home, I tried to start writing the book, but I realized that there were a couple of missing pieces and that I wanted to learn more. And so I tracked down a videotape that she had given to the USC Shoah Foundation, and I watched that, and that was also really helpful because she had forgotten some details because she gave that tape like a decade before I ever interviewed her, and also because she had left some parts out that were probably a little bit more challenging for her to tell to her granddaughter. So I was glad to watch that. And then after that, I started writing it as a story, and I went through like hundreds of rounds of edits, trying to make it better, trying to show rather than tell, or trying to condense certain chapters. And then I was lucky enough to find Amsterdam publishers, who also published Nechama's book, who agreed to work with me. And yes.
When did you find the time to do this? Like you were in 9th grade?
I was in 7th grade when I started.
7th grade when you started?
Well, 7th going into 8th grade.
Wow. And then when did you find that time in school? And
So I started over the summer, and then I would work on it mostly during just breaks, because over the weekends I would have a lot of work, but I would work on it over break, and then over the summer I would get mainly most of it done. So yeah, during those pockets of free time.
wow, that's incredible. And
What was your process like?
so my process was a lot of the stories, like everybody, all survivors have like different ways of dealing with it and talking about it, but she didn't stop talking about all the stories. So I grew up on the stories, a lot of stories I had already. And then my brother-in-law videoed her, like similar to you, like over like the course of a year of saying her story from beginning to end. And then I was living in Israel at the time, so I went to the Holocaust Museum there, and I was in the library a lot and doing more research to fill in the gaps, and also to like fact check things that she was saying, because as much as like I heard the stories growing up, I couldn't believe them. So I was like, oh, I don't know, let's look this up. And at one point, the librarian who was helping me was like, you have to stop like doubting what she's saying, because it's hard for you to hear. You have the best source, like you have a first person account. And yeah, and you, every time I would check something up, it would be just, yeah, that was true and more. So, but I wanted to like also put all the dates in order and things like that. But I'm curious about you, like from the years, you said you finished it you started when you were 13 and finished it at 15?
Yes.
So was it challenging to write it at such a young age and to hear what she went through at that?
Well, some of the parts were a little bit more challenging to hear, especially because it gave me a new view of my grandmother, but I'm really glad that I heard them, because it showed to me how extremely resilient and strong she is, and I don't think that I would have fully understood that without hearing all of those stories, and so I'm really thankful that I was able to do this with her. But I also think that, of course, if I started writing it now, I think it probably would have been written differently, or I would have had to go through less editing stages, because I'm older now. But I can't keep rewriting forever, so.
Right, not necessarily, by the way. Any author just like rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. Your next book, you'll have less edits, because you did it already. I'm curious, like, what do you think about preserving? You spoke a lot about preserving memories for future generations. So, like, would you tell, like, what are some practical ways other teenagers can do this?
Yeah.
And would you recommend doing this?
Yes, I would definitely recommend doing this. And I think that it doesn't have to be in the form of a book or for a project. You can just ask your family members about their childhood and their ancestors, just for the love of learning about them. And in my experience, my family members have always been willing to talk about their stories and their childhood. So I think that teenagers can just go up to their grandparents or parents and just ask them about their ancestors and their stories.
So you spoke about a little bit like how that inspired you. it made you realize how, like, you know, persistent she was and how resilient, like, is there, like, what other gifts, or is there more gifts do you think that has given you to do that, to be able to do that, to hear her story?
Yes, so I think that pretty much covered it all, but I think also I now have the ability to help educate other people about the Holocaust who might not have the same access that I do to someone who was hidden during the Holocaust and someone who survived the Holocaust, and so I'm grateful that I'm able to use that to teach other people, because I know that a lot of people who might not have Jewish roots or might not have Holocaust survivors in their families, they probably don't know as much about the Holocaust.
Right, so just be able to educate kids of that. And is there anything else you want, like, young readers to take away from the book and learning about the Holocaust?
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, my main goal was to kind of show young readers that you have the ability to help other people share their stories, and that you can work with people whose voices might not be heard in mainstream media to kind of share their stories. And I also thought it was important because not every Holocaust story is the same. I think most people in the world know about Anne Frank and how she was hidden in an attic, or about all of the people who tragically died in gas chambers, which is what you were talking about. But there are also Holocaust stories that are different, like there are people who were hidden, and so I think kind of that idea that one size doesn't fit all for Holocaust stories is something important that I want people to take away.
That's very interesting. Like, for my book, I also, like, growing up, I also read a lot of Holocaust books, and I felt like a lot of them were about a non-Jew saving a Jew, and that's important stories and incredible stories, but I wanted, like, to see it, a Jew, like, my grandmother was such a hero to me, and I wanted to see a Jewish hero in the Holocaust literature, especially because it's about the Jewish people. I didn't want it to be just like the victims, like how people persevered, like you're saying, and showed resilience in the hard times. So, like, every family story gives a different perspective. Yeah, that's beautiful. And then also you said, like, there's something about books and historical fiction or narrative nonfiction that's easier for people, especially teenagers, to learn than textbooks or reading a study or facts. So can you tell me more about that, like why you think?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that books capture people's attention, or at least they capture my attention in ways that textbooks do not, because of the narrative tools that are used. So dialogue, description of setting, and also just the personal anecdotes, because textbooks a lot of the time just talk about the facts and just talk about kind of dates, but they don't talk about what people felt and their true lived experiences. And so I think that books probably stay longer with people than textbooks do, and so I wanted to kind of give another option for books that can help educate people.
Yeah.
And what about you?
your story? Your story does that beautifully.
Yeah,
It's like,
thank you.
like you get sucked, I read it and you get, like, sucked into it, and you're like, oh, this is, you don't feel like you're learning, and then afterwards you realize that you've learned so much, but you hide. I think that, yeah, I agree with that 100%. The stories are the most powerful, and that's why I love reading, and I love teaching through stories, and, like, any lesson that you want to get through to anyone, if you say it in a story, that's the most powerful way to do it, and you've done that really well.
Same with your book. When I was reading it, also drew me in. I think I read it in like 2 days or something.
Thank you. I read yours in one, so.
Well, yours is longer though.
Do you have hope for the future for Holocaust education?
I mean, well, right now there are Right now there are very few living Holocaust survivors, so I think that the time is now to preserve their stories. But, so I do have hope. I have hope that people in my generation will take it upon themselves to interview and talk to the living survivors now while they have the chance. So that is my hope. Yeah. What about you?
yeah, I'm also, that's something my grandmother passed away in May. And that was something she was so passionate about and so worried about. She wanted so, like, she said, like, there's, you know, you can't compare when you hear it to someone. Hear someone saying it to hearing about someone. So I think that giving her a voice, I was just looking at a video actually of right when the book came out, and she was so cute. She was like, I have a voice now, and to have a voice and to be able to use your voice is something that's really powerful, especially in today's times of recent anti-Semitism, which I wanted to know, like, have you experienced that from publishing your book, and do you think that these stories like this could help stop it?
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to have never experienced anti-Semitism, but I know you have experienced anti-Semitism with your book. But I think also most people probably know about Kanye West's recent remarks on anti-Semitism and kind of just how they've been insensitive and they've been very anti-Semitic. And he's also talked a lot about Nazis and Hitler, and so I think by resurfacing those really immoral ideals, he's just kind of like perpetuating anti-Semitism and especially Holocaust denial. And so I think that we need to work against people like him and amplify voices who bring up Holocaust survivors rather than bring them down. And I know you have also been receiving comments on your Instagram that have been from Holocaust deniers as well.
Yeah, so I've always had I have an Instagram account for the book, and I've always had, here and there, like, anti-Semitic remarks and Holocaust deniers. I sort of didn't really pay attention to them. And then one day, all of a sudden I was getting like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages about, one of them said the Holocaust had a roller coaster, the Auschwitz had a roller coaster in there, and pools. So that was a fun one. But like a lot of things, how it wouldn't make sense, a lot of scientists coming at me, that wouldn't make sense that they could have gassed them because the temperature was too low in the air, like really like horrible deniers. And then I was like, what's going on? Why am I getting all this today? And then I saw what Kanye West said. And to me it was just a lesson, because I always think that like, oh, like these people, like it doesn't really matter what they say, like everybody knows they're not well. Like it doesn't matter. Like if I would have watched that video before I saw the messages, I would have said like, this is laughable almost, like please, this is not a threat to us. He's calling Hitler a good guy. But then the hundreds, I'm just one person on Instagram, like the hundreds and hundreds of messages I was getting about how the Holocaust never really happened, or even worse, like a lot of messages, but it never happened, but it should have, because you just go on to harm other people. You should have been eradicated a long time ago, things like that. I think that we don't realize, as much as we're told, we don't realize how much words really matter, and words matter so much, and they have an impact. And there's just so many, I had to shut off the comments on the Instagram because there's just so many people who idolize this person, and he says something, so that must be right, without really thinking into it. So I think what you said is so true. You just have to amplify other voices even more, because I was really thinking, like, is it going to make a difference? Like, oh, so we'll talk and talk and talk about it, and like, how much will that help? But I was thinking, my grandmother, who went through so much and saw the worst happen with anti-Semitism, she believed so much to speak up against it. So she believed in a better future for it, even though she had every reason to be just like, forget it, we can't do anything. And I know a lot of people have that attitude of like, this is what it is, we can't do anything about it. And she believed, no, we could do something about it. So I think even like in little situations, the more you use your voice, the more you say something, it doesn't have to be writing a book, like see that, but the more you just even say something, if someone says something not right, I think it could make a big difference.
Adding on to that, I think that the more that popular celebrities like Kanye West say anti-Semitic remarks, the more that people will start to follow him because he's so popular. And so I think that the more people, even if they have smaller platforms, the more that we get people to speak out against him and his anti-Semitism, the more we can kind of like counteract all of his followers.
Right. Yeah. Sure. I wanted to know if I know on like your cover, you have like the redhead. I wanted to know if that had any significance to you.
Yes, so that's something we have in common. Nechama mentioned that earlier, but both of our grandmothers had red hair growing up, and so the red hair played a really big role in my grandmother's story, at least because the fact that she didn't look Jewish saved her from being put into a concentration camp like Nechama's grandmother, and so and she also had green eyes, and red hair and green eyes is kind of like an unusual combination, especially for Jewish people at the time, and so that saved her because she didn't look Jewish, so no one suspected that she was Jewish, and she could live her life without kind of the feeling that she was going to be.
That was really her ticket for survival.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And what about your grandmother's?
It's interesting. I'm just thinking, like my grandfather had blonde hair and blue eyes, and he was able to escape, but she wasn't able to. But she grew up in a time in a small Romanian, like very superstitious village, and they thought red hair was a curse, so they used to like spit at her in the marketplace to try to get the demon out of her hair. And her mother used to like pour nut oils on her head and try to dye her hair. And she said she would sit there for hours in the garden and like waiting for her mother to finish trying to dye her hair. And the whole time her eyes had to be closed because the oils would just be running in her face. And the whole time she said she'd be praying, please don't work, please don't work, please don't work. And then she went to the mirror afterwards and she was like, please still be red, and opened her eyes, and of course her hair was red as ever because nut oils are not dyeing anyone's hair. And she would be like, phew. And she would look at herself in the mirror and say, you're so beautiful. Don't worry about what anyone else says. And I just think that's why I wanted to call the book The Redhead of Auschwitz, because I think that belief in herself and that, like, doesn't matter what anyone else says to me, I'm proud of who I am, got her through so much, and that really pulled her through. She said even when they shaved her hair in Auschwitz, that was like one of the first things they did, was they shaved her hair, and she saw her reflection on like a shard of glass that was on the floor, and she was like horrified first to see her reflection, and then she said, well, no one's going to take the redhead out of my spirit. I know who I am. And I actually had someone that was recently, she just reached out to me and she said she was going through chemo and she was also a redhead, and she just connected so much with that because she lost her hair, and she said, well, I'm still that fighter inside. Because redheads also are like that fiery, at least my grandmother was, that very fiery, very stubborn spirit, and I think she like taught me like be proud of who you are no matter how many people spit in your face. And she was always also so proud that she was Jewish, no matter how many people, like she got so much hate for it, and she was just so proud to be Jewish, and she was always like telling us like never compromise on who you are for other people, whether they tell you it's a curse or it's anything, you be proud of yourself, and I think that saves you from a lot of things. Yeah. Thank you so much. Anything else you want to say? Does anyone have any questions for Suzette?
I'm sorry I haven't read your book yet, but I was wondering, do you think about going to schools and talk about it? Because a lot of kids don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, that's one of my...
And the second question was, do you know third generation, that organization?
Yes.
Are you part of that?
I'm not part of that yet, but I've heard
You should be, because they go to schools and they speak about exactly what you're talking about. And they teach you how to speak to the students.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's very important. I'm part of that, but I'm second generation, of course. You're third.
Yes, so I've heard about third generation. I'll definitely look into that. Thank you so much. but yeah, so that's my main goal, to go talk to schools. I've started kind of locally with my school. I talked to my middle school.
Horsemen, they have.
Yeah, Horseman. I talked to my middle school
Mhm.
about my book and about just the Holocaust in general. I also gave just like a small introduction on the Holocaust because a lot of the sixth graders, the youngest grade in the middle school, didn't know about the Holocaust. So that was really helpful, and yes, and I'm hoping to talk at more
Is the
schools.
principal involved in that also in your school?
No,
The
not
director?
really. No, it's yeah.
They should.
Thank you.
No, I'm saying that part of the curriculum it should be, you know,
Yes, that's the hope. That's the hope.
you don't have a day that they talk about the Holocaust when there's a Memorial Day.
Not yet, but I'm trying to. I mean, my book just came out less than a month ago, so but I'm hoping to
Yeah,
help with that. Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, maybe for you, you might be a couple of years older. My niece is in her early 30s. I was wondering, she was thinking of writing a book. What do you recommend? Of course, she has a very important, busy schedule, but she was always interested in the history and personal history. And how would you recommend for her to start in writing, perhaps?
I have some great book recommendations if you want on like writing, like, because like as Suzette was saying, it's not, you can't, like, if you just like say the facts and nobody wants to read that, so it has to really be like a novel, but everything true. So like I would say, so to read good books on the craft of writing, and take writing classes.
She writes very well. She studied at Sarah Lawrence.
Oh, okay. Oh, so she's
So she has the skills.
she has the skills, right? Yeah, and then another book, I love books, so I'm just gonna give an answer to the book.
Right.
Grit by Angela Duckworth is just about like,
Can you spell the name?
grit, Grit, that's just about like sitting down and doing the, like,
Oh,
you
let me
can
write
have
this
passion
down,
from
then.
today to tomorrow for something,
Mhm.
but you have to have grit to like actually get it
Yeah,
done.
I mean,
I mean,
that's what she
did you
means.
find that, like,
She's
it's
not
so
the
hard to
top.
be like censored and like,
I mean,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I was younger, so I probably got distracted more easily than you did. But
probably not.
but yeah, no, I think you just have to like sit in your room with the door closed and
Right.
not let anything distract you. Maybe put on like noise canceling headphones and just write. But also take breaks as well, because
Right.
like if you sit for more than like an hour writing the same thing, unless you're on a roll, then sometimes you can.
I went to like coffee shops, like, they wanted to get rid of me so bad, like, I just sit there and
So
sit
may I
there.
ask you how old, she's 16, how old are you?
I'm 27.
Oh, 20, so you'd be close to that.
Yeah.
This is it. Let me ask you, what are the types of books? The Grit book
Grit
might
book
be
is good,
appropriate for
yeah.
her. Grit, Grit,
Yeah,
written by,
Angela Duckworth.
how do you spell the last name?
Like duck, D-U-C.
Oh, Duck.
Yeah, Worth. Yeah, and then the writing book, she doesn't need, she had it, right?
She could write a book.
Right. No, I'm saying the book's on craft. It's-
No,
yeah,
she's
fine.
well crafted.
Yeah, so that's it. Yeah. Tell her good luck. It's not easy. I don't know if yeah,
I would imagine it's difficult.
yeah.
I guess to what age would you start speaking about the Holocaust to young children, and kind of how would you approach it? I have a 2 and a 5-year-old at home, so, you know, especially with like all the anti-Semitic remarks, and I follow you on Instagram as well, so like sometimes she'll see like some of the videos and she's like, what is that? And I start to
hard.
talk about it,
Yeah.
but then I'm like, it's like such a fine line for that like young age. Obviously with the 2-year-old I'm not.
Right.
But with my 5-year-old, I'm like, want to give some information, but not make it scary and not make it seem like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be Jewish. Like, God forbid, I
Right,
don't want that. Like,
right.
why do people not like people because they're Jewish?
Right.
Right? So I think that's, I don't know. You guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's so, I mean, I have a 6 and 4-year-old, so I think it's so hard, like, I wanna tell them, but I'm also like the same, like, I don't
Yeah.
want them to have a bad taste in their mouth. I think that, and that's why I really also wanted to write about my grandmother, because she was so proud of herself.
Yeah.
And she was so like, she came out as the winner in the end, you know, and I want them to have that, association, not like a victim, not something to be ashamed of. So I find that very challenging of like talking to kids about it, and also I think that like once you have kids, you're so much more sensitive. So like they're more resilient than we are.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm just like want to protect them from everything, and they're gonna hear it from someone else.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right.
I'm wondering what school is gonna say.
Right.
And I wanna be able to have some type of,
Right.
like,
Well,
give
for-
them some knowledge.
From my experience, I mean, I don't know about little kids, but from my experience, like in school, it doesn't really get talked about that much when you're in elementary school, at least where I went.
Mm.
And so I think that when I learned from basically just reading fiction books, and I think fiction books don't make it super scary. Like this is like one of the most famous ones, like Number the Stars.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that one. I actually
I
still
read-
have my copy.
I read that one.
As well.
I think I read that one in like 4th grade, maybe end of 3rd grade, and so that's a little bit older than 5 years old. But
Yeah.
I think like that's a good book, and there are a lot of books out there I think that are geared towards younger ages. There's also one I read that maybe when I was a little bit older, but it's called like The War That Saved My Life, and it's a series, and it's a really good series.
What's the name?
And
The war
it's
that
called
saved
The
my
War
life.
That Saved My Life. I think I read it maybe when I was like 9 or 10, and it's a really good book. And then there are other books like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is also famous.
Blue coat.
No, that one's for a little older.
Do you think that museums will help take them when they are 5-year-old to see this museum or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Or-
We went like at 7.
I think I went when I was 7
7?
to some of the museums. Yeah,
Mhm.
starting around that age. But some of the pictures probably aren't appropriate, but just like the
Right.
gruesome ones. But everything else, I think just like is appropriate.
Which museum did you go to?
I'm also thinking like the concept of like,
I think I went to one in Washington D.C.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
But not here.
I've also been to this one, yes,
Okay.
before. But that was the first one, or one of the first ones that I went to.
Yeah.
yeah, I also think like the concept of like, telling them the story in a way of like, I think kids understand the concept of like, good and evil, and sort of like the good guys, like were the people who were not doing the bad things.
Mm.
That's what, like, I remember going to to Auschwitz, and I sort of almost like in a weird way, like I pitied the Nazis. Like, this is what your life had to come to. Like, this was your goals in life. This was your job, as opposed to someone who, I would rather a short life, like my grandmother's brother, who was always giving, always helping people, always trying to like make other people feel good, always learning and studying. Nobody wants to be the bad guy, you know. So when it comes to like that, like I think they understand that battle of good and evil, and it's like you have to say like it's not that they did something wrong, they didn't do anything wrong, it was just bad people in the world, and there is a concept of just bad people, I think. And also I think they see more than know, like oh how happy you are to be Jewish, then they feel it, I think. Like they're so excited to light the menorah, you know?
Celebrate the
Yeah,
thought of the holidays.
yeah, like it's like, oh my gosh, like the most, you know, and if you're excited, if I'm excited, they see it. Like I always try to give them candy when I light the Shabbos candles. You know, like every Friday night, I'm like, you want a cinnamon bun? I'm lighting the candles.
Yeah.
Like it's the most exciting, it happens every Friday night, but like, you know, and I think they feel that, like excitement, and good association with it.
Oh, Brody.
What?
So when you're going to schools and visiting schools and talking about your book, I know you said you only just started with that. Do you consider yourself trying to teach others yourself about the topic of the Holocaust? Or are you more so trying to get the schools to educate their students on that?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a mix of both. I don't know if I'm super qualified to be like the only person to teach them the Holocaust. I mean, I know what I know, but I don't think that I don't have like teaching experience, but I think that I can teach them through the lens of my grandmother's story to give them like a different perspective on the Holocaust and also just the basic facts. And I think hopefully that will motivate the schools and the administration to take on teaching about the Holocaust, especially starting at a younger age, because I know in New York State there's a mandate for public schools to teach about the Holocaust, but that doesn't start until junior year of high school, and so
That's late.
yeah, so that's late. And so if I go to talk to middle schools, then maybe they will start to implement a program for younger aged kids.
I just want to mention that I'm familiar with the system, and teachers themselves, especially non-Jewish teachers, are not happy teaching about the Holocaust. That's why it's pushed all the way to the 8th grade.
Why do you think that is?
They just, well, it's not a pain that they feel, that's
Right.
important.
Right,
It's not a lesson that they want.
right.
And many non-Jews currently are teachers, and they're, the high-level people who are in the schools, they prefer to have a minority represent the school. So they're not, it doesn't touch them, the story, and they think it's a pain in the neck.
I've had some teachers reach out on Instagram to me. It was so nice. They said like, I'm teaching because like I'm gonna teach my kids your book. I'm gonna teach my kids your book. I was so impressed because it's so not common. Yeah.
I think adding on to that, it doesn't have to be necessarily on the whole school level. It can start small. So we can start with certain teachers. So maybe one teacher teaches about the Holocaust and then they tell another teacher about it. I think that it's probably harder to get the whole administration of the school to teach about it, but if we start at a smaller level, then hopefully more people will.
I was only exposed to negative comments, except if you were Jewish,
Right.
which was a minority.
I think if the principals will be insisting on that, it will be forced into the curriculum. It's this principal who have to implement it.
Yes.
They just can't get away with it,
Yes. Well,
They've
I
also-
will.
yeah. Go good.
Yeah.
Okay, they also have studies like, this itself should be a motivator, like schools that learn about the Holocaust have, I forgot the percentage, but way less bullying even.
Yeah.
Like that's not the goal, that's not our goal in teaching about the Holocaust, but it's beneficial even if it's uncomfortable for them or they don't care. It's so beneficial for the students to have that.
I think that's it for today. I want to thank all of you so much for coming. I really appreciate the support.